Hey, Roger Fields here, and we're going to talk about recruiting children's ministry volunteers, workers. Now you got to realize too, first off, the word volunteer is a dirty word. You realize that, right? It's a great word with kids. When you say to kids, I need a volunteer, they light up, hands go up. You say that to an adult, big problem. So we're going to ask, what's the best way to recruit workers for children's ministry? How do you go about this? Now, when I began to travel doing Kidz Blitz, I quickly realized this was the universal need. Every children's pastor I ran into was struggling a little bit with how to recruit volunteers, how to get workers. And so everybody thought everybody else had an easier time of it. It was kind of funny, you know, all the small churches thought the big churches had all the workers they needed, and some of the big churches thought even smaller churches, because they didn't need as many workers, would find it easier to get workers in their environment. So everybody else thought that everybody else was doing better than they were. And in fact, they were all struggling with what do you do, how do you build this team? Now, I call this Roger's Guerrilla Warfare Recruiting Method. Now, it's not for everybody. I'll just tell you, it really isn't. It's not for the faint-hearted. And you've got to clear this with your church leadership, whoever's over you, before you do this. Now, here's my disclaimer, okay? The following views and strategies may not represent the beliefs and/or values of your local church leadership. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, do not email me and tell me you got in trouble for doing what I'm getting ready to suggest. I'm going to lay the groundwork first, and I'm going to tell you what the exact strategy is. But do not tell me you're in trouble. You've got to make sure that the people above you are on board with this strategy, because it is a little bit off the beaten path. Okay? Now, this started when, you know, the early first few months into running Kidz Blitz live events. I went to a church in South Carolina, and they were struggling to find people to work in children's church. I mean, they were having a hard time. It was a church of about 500 people, so it wasn't a huge church, but it wasn't real small either. And they had two people, a lady who was the children's pastor. They had to pay her to go in there, and she made her husband go in there with her, and that was it. Nobody else would do it. And so she was struggling with what to do. And I said, now, I was just guessing when I said this, but I said, but I had a strategy for her, and the strategy I'm getting ready to tell you. I said, if you do this strategy, you can have a waiting list of workers within 6 weeks. And I was guessing about the 6 weeks part, you know. And so she said, no way is that ever going to happen here. Not going to happen. And I said, well, you know, what do you have to lose? Because right now, nothing's working. She said, that's true. So she put this into effect. And I'll tell you what, 3 weeks later, I talked to her on the phone. She said, I have a waiting list of people wanting to work in children's church. Now, this method does work. Now, if you do it pretty much the way I tell you to do it, it'll work. Now, there again, make sure you get clearance. Now, there's a couple things. First of all, let's back up a little. Think about what we normally do to try to get workers into our children's ministry. I mean, it's insane. We basically just beg for workers. I call it the fog a mirror approach. We basically put it out there. If you're a living, breathing human being, if you can just fog a mirror, you know, that's the basic qualification. You got to be alive. Then we want you to work in our children's ministry. And so we beg. We put notices in the bulletin or newsletter. We beg online. We sometimes get real creative and put like a little kiosk or table out in the foyer where we try to recruit people to work in children's ministry. We do announcements in front of the congregation. Sometimes we get upset with the lead pastor because he's not supportive enough, so we make him make an announcement, you know. If anybody would like to work in children's ministry, we really need you. And the fifth grade boys have now killed the last 2 teachers, and we need somebody to come in there and help us with that. And if you would just sign up, and we make, you know, Marge, the children's pastor, stand up. If you just sign up with her on the way out, she'll put you in children's ministry. I mean, we do all kinds of things to try to get people to work in children's ministry, because the fact is that children's ministry demands more people, more workers than any other department in the church. Now, think about this also. What would have happened if Jesus had recruited the way we recruit? I mean, think about it. If he had, you know, made the, Peter stand up at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and he had said, you know, to the crowd, oh, we're still 3 disciples short of our dozen. If you would like to be a disciple, go check out Peter over there. He will sign you up to be a disciple. Now, if Jesus had done that, what would they have thought? Well, they would have thought what you would have thought, and that is that Must not be a big deal to be a disciple. I mean, if that's the requirement, you got to sign up with Pete on the way out. Must not be a big deal. You know, nobody signed up for Jesus. Nobody volunteered to be a disciple for Jesus. He wasn't going to, you know, he wasn't really looking for just volunteers like that anyway. But, you know, Peter did not come to Jesus one day and say, you know, God has been putting a burden on me for this discipleship ministry, and I think I could really be an asset to you. Eventually, you might need some soldier's ear cut off, and I'll be available for you. You know, he didn't volunteer for Jesus. Matter of fact, it was the opposite. He came up to Jesus and said, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man. Leave me now." And Jesus said to him, "No, pal, the way it's going to work is you are now going to fish for men." I mean, Jesus recruited him. So it was not a volunteer basis. It was not the way that Jesus did this. So, what do you do? How do you do this? Now, a couple of things you have to have in place before you even think about recruiting. Okay, do not even think about recruiting until you have two things in place. Number one, you have to settle on the content that you want to get through to your kids, particularly your elementary age kids in children's ministry. Big deal. Listen, if it just looks and sounds like childcare, that's what people are going to think it is. It's got to be substantive. And I would say this, it's got to be a lot more about what God has done for us through Jesus, so kids grow up understanding what God has done for them, rather than what we do for God. Look, if it's all about your values and virtues, I'm telling you, you're not really even needed. I mean, the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts can do that. What we're here to do is to build into kids the amazing stuff that God has done for us through Jesus when He died for us, resurrected, gave His life for us, and how He lives through us today. And so that's the main thing that we want kids to come away with. Now, when you start with that, at least people who can see what you're doing in children's ministry know that it is valuable and substantive and it's not just childcare. So you got to have something in place to let people know that you're about your content, what you're teaching. Now, secondly, it's very simple. Number two, just look around and make sure it just doesn't look uninviting. Make sure, you don't have to spend a ton of money to theme out your environment, but it doesn't need to look like the local DMV either. I mean, declutter the place, put stuff away, clean, paint, whatever you got to do. Just make your environment look like a place that somebody would want to come and spend, an hour or two, whatever it is, on a Sunday or on the weekends. So look at your substance, look at your environment. Now, here's what I told the church in South Carolina. Number one, here's what you do. You put this statement out to your church. You let them know that no longer will you accept volunteers for children's ministry. You say that to people. You put that announcement in the bulletin or wherever you can find to put it in print, and you say something like this. People have asked me why we do not accept volunteers anymore, and that's a great question. The reason is because we think God wants the best people possible to be working with our kids to make the ministry effective and safe. And you let that message go out. And you let people know that from now on, working in the children's ministry under you in your church is by invitation only. That's how it works. Now, first of all, what have you just done? Now, first, you haven't done any harm, because not like a bunch of people were volunteering anyway, But what you've done is you're beginning to turn this into a feeling of desperation. You just need help, to turning it into being an honor to work in your children's ministry. And that's what you want. Now, for the people that you already have, make sure they know that you honor them, that you value them, that you think they're the greatest. Make sure they know that. And that anybody else that comes in, that from now on, it is going to be a big deal to work in the children's ministry at your church. All right, secondly, you identify, for lack of a better term, you identify cool people in your church. Now, people who love the Lord and who know what it's all about. But you identify people that will be an asset to your children's ministry. Now, you have your own people put out feelers, and you begin to look at who's available to you. Now, in Florida, when I was as a children's pastor there, I found out we had a boy by the name of Troy, everybody was telling me he was really creative, you need to meet him. Well, I tracked him down and I recruited him to work in children's ministry, and he was great. He's now he went to Hollywood. Now he's a guru of reality television. He was very talented, very gifted. But let me tell you the principle: boring people equals boring ministry. And so I don't want a bunch of people that all just are the same. I don't even want a bunch of people like me. I want an eclectic group of cool people who can make this ministry into something really neat. And so I want to try to identify them. I want to, if I have to go to new members meetings or whatever, if I have to just hobnob, I like to be freed up when children's church is going on so I can meet people, I can meet the parents. I want to make sure I'm meeting every parent that comes through. I want to know who's available to me. And I go after people many times who don't even have kids. I don't just go after parents, but I want to identify the people that I think would be great in children's ministry. Now, so here's what I do. Once I begin to identify them, I go after them one at a time. And I say, Henry, we're doing some great stuff in children's church. Our children's ministry is really helping kids understand what God has done for them in Jesus. And I begin to share with them the content of what we're doing. And we need people like you to be a part of this. Now, you don't have to give me an answer right now, but I need you. And usually I recruit for about 6 months at a time. I said, I need you for about 6 months to think and pray about being a part of what we're doing in children's ministry. Now, listen, if Henry has no interest, I do not try to manipulate him, do not try to guilt him. I let him go on his way. But if he already knows the standard in the church that it's by invitation only, and we're not going to put out this desperation message, he's honored that we would ask him to be a part of this. And 9 times out of 10, Henry's going to think about that, and he's going to pray about that, and a lot of times he's going to come back and say, I'd like to be a part of what you're doing. And so that one at a time, one here, one there, I began to build this quality team of people who can rock out this children's ministry. So there again, the part that can get you in trouble with all this is if the leadership above you doesn't understand that what you're getting ready to do is put out a message that you don't take volunteers anymore, it's by invitation only. I had one person say to me one time, they thought this is a criticism. They said, well, you're just trying to build an elite team. Yeah, that's exactly right. He may even said an elite club. You're just trying to build an elite club. Absolutely, that's what I'm trying to do. And I'll tell you what, pretty much nobody's off limits to me. If I believe that they're going to be an asset to what we're doing in children's ministry, I go after them. Now, what do? You've done all this. You're getting people in, you're recruiting people, and all of a sudden people are going to want to be a part of that. I'm telling you, the word will get out. It does change the landscape. And so people are going to come up and say, well, we know you don't take volunteers in your children's ministry, but we'd like to maybe see if we could somehow maybe work in this, And so you say, well, you can fill out this for me. Maybe it's a real simple little application, just some basic stuff. Say, fill this out for me and let me look it over and talk to you and we'll see. And so you look at their application, you talk to them. And if it's somebody that you think would be good, then you invite them to be a part of what you're doing. Look, if you don't think they're a good fit, do them a favor and steer them into some other place of service, greeter, parking lot, whatever it is. But help people fit in the right place. Now, one kind of cool strategy, now this is kind of a sidebar, but I've got to give credit where credit's due. Heard this first from Brian Dollar, in Arkansas. And he said one of the things he does with men is he recruits them to be security. And it is a fact that all guys like to stand up and look tough, and so you get some guy and George, we need you to stand by the door here and make sure as if you're going to have a terrorist barge in the door, but we need you to secure the place. And so you can get men to do this all day long. But what happens is a lot of these guys will begin to look in there and see what you're doing. They begin to hear the content of what you're teaching, and little by little they're going to want to be a bigger part of what you're doing in children's church and children's ministry. So, but everybody gets it. Everybody gets it by invitation only. It's a big deal to be on your children's ministry team. Big deal that they're going to have the opportunity to just do something to minister to boys and girls. It may be just to get them the refreshments. It may be something very simple. Doesn't mean everybody's going to be a lead teacher. They're all going to be doing a game or a skit or object lesson or something. But they're going to do some stuff that's going to help you to make this children's ministry substantive, to make it rock, to really get the attention of people within the church. And so that little by little, everybody begins to get it. It's a big deal. It's making a difference in the lives of boys and girls. You're not just babysitting. It's not daycare. You're doing some stuff that will benefit these kids for the rest of their lives. And so people that are a part of your team get that that's what they're a part of. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can I subscribe to this YouTube channel? Well, I'm glad you asked. You just hit that big rectangular red button below the video and it'll subscribe you. It'll ask if you want to be notified, and of course you want to be notified. That's how you know if new videos are coming out. And we'd really appreciate it if you'd even share this with somebody. If there's somebody that you know that would appreciate or learn from this video, share it with them. Thank you very much.